Hello everyone, today we're going to be looking at how you can best equip your units for all types of difficult content in FFBE. These tips will be particularly useful when doing Dark Visions, Clash of Wills, difficult weekly bosses, and trials. This guide is intended for beginner players, so if I don't go into enough depth on a topic and you have advice of your own to share, please comment down below. I will organize this video into chapters, so use those to navigate to sections that interest you. Finally, FFBE is a very deep game and it can be difficult as a new player to learn all of the mechanics, so I very much hope that this video is useful for you. There are a lot of factors to consider when equipping your units with gear, vision cards, and materia. I'm going to cover the best practice for maximizing your unit's damage, but in order to do this, let's take a quick look at the damage formulas. As you can see, the damage that you deal is directly multiplied by something called multipliers. We're going to cover some of the most important ones below. So the chain damage bonus is going to be something that units can get up to 6 times the amount of damage they're dealing. I've talked about this in my chaining video, so you can go ahead and look at that if you want more information on it, but it's something that we want to have at the maximum cap. Killers are another very important multiplier that you cannot skip out on if you want to be dealing as much damage as possible. If you're someone that does jump damage, and that's if you are a Dragoon that actually jumps up in the air and lands on your opponent, then that's going to be a very important multiplier for you. But one of the most important ones that we're typically going to see is the limit burst damage boost, because most damage dealers in FFBE are limit burst damage dealers. There are exceptions like jump damage dealers, or maybe there's someone with a really high potency skill, but for the most part we're going to be building limit burst damage in most of our formations. Elemental damage boost is also very important, but that's going to be more around building our formation and which units we bring into battle, so we won't cover that in this video. So while raising your attack and/or magic is important, these multipliers are going to have the biggest impact on your damage and should be prioritized when you're building your team. Now we're going to take a look at some factors to consider when equipping your team before any battle. Now this is important to note, this is before the battle, this is not during the battle when you might apply some specific buffs. This is what you can do to maximize your unit's power before you even get into combat. So the first thing we're going to look at is one of the most important things that you need to build for, which is the chain modifier. So if you have a true dual wield unit, they are going to have a 2x cap innately, and you'll be able to see that when you go look at their passives. You can go check that yourself to see that they have that 200% boost to the chain cap. However, true double hand TDH units need to get 100% chain cap boost from some source, and this could be Savior of Souls, Lightning's STMR, which you should get a couple of copies of if you can, or maybe it's going to be the Clash of Wills gear, which can be customized in order to have that 100% cap boost. This is important because it's a multiplier, and it's one of the biggest multipliers on a single piece of gear or materia slot because it's a 100% boost, whereas a lot of killers cap out at 75% boost. Same thing for LB damage. This is the one slot giving you the biggest boost that it can. So it's in my eyes the most important thing to sort out first is where are you getting your chain cap increase from, and then you go and look at the other factors for building. Next up is killers, and these depend on whether you're looking for physical or magical damage, and that's a whole nother topic on its own, so you can look up the differences between those on the wiki if you want. But basically, if you have a physical damage dealer, make sure they have physical killers. Most of the new killers are just for both anyway, but some of the older killers will specify magic only or physical only, and that's very important because you don't want to waste your time equipping a killer that's not actually doing anything. So these killers are specifically for different types of enemies, and you have to look up what your, the boss that you're fighting, what type of race they are, and you can see that in the quest menu, so it's very easy to do. You can get killers from materia, you can get it from gear, from VCs, lots of different sources, and it's important to remember that these are multipliers. You can get up to 4 times damage from the killers, and if you are able to do that, it's going to be more impactful than if you just raise your attack from equipping a higher attack, let's say chest piece. Then that's all well and good. It looks like you have higher attack, but you're actually dealing less damage because you have less killers. So you want to max out your killers before you then go and start maxing out your attack. So some common places to acquire killers include TMRs, STMRs, events, and trials. So you can always go look up which killer you need on the wiki or on something like FFBE Equip, and then you can go find out where you can get that from and see if it's accessible to you. Like I said earlier, most of our damage dealers are limit burst damage dealers. So limit burst damage is something that we definitely want to build because, again, multipliers make a big difference. So limit burst damage multipliers cap at 300%, and you should read your unit's passives to see if they can raise them innately. Oftentimes, a unit will get a massive limit burst passive increase if they have their materia, their TMR or their STMR equipped, or maybe they need to have a certain type of weapon equipped, whatever it is. Maybe they need to be dual wielding. Just read your unit's passives. Make sure you know that you're getting all of the bonus limit burst damage that you can from the unit, and then you start using materias, you start using gear, etc. to help you cap that limit burst damage. Now, some damage dealers are not going to use limit bursts, and that can involve units that use chaining to deal damage, or maybe high potency abilities like jumps. And in that case, if you were using one of those units, then you would not use limit burst damage. You would still, however, use killers and the chain cap increase. After you've built out your chain cap, you've solved all of your killers, you have them maxed at 300%, you have your limit burst damage maxed at 300%, then it is time to start working towards that attack or magic, or maybe both if you're hybrid, that 400% cap. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, we are going to look at examples after this, so don't you worry, but that is the last thing that you want to build. You have to do these other things first if you want to deal the most damage that you can deal. Now, we don't just have the 400% attack and magic caps that you can boost from equipment and materia and all sorts of other things. There's also the equipment magic and equipment attack boosts that you get for depending on if you are TDH or TDW. So if you are a TDH unit, then you can stack up a bonus of 400% equipment attack. And if you are a true dual wield unit, then you only get a 200% bonus. So these units that have these different styles, they often have passives that depend if they are dual wielding or not. So units that have these passives want them to use specific weapons, or want them to have 2 weapons, or want them to hold 1 weapon. And a lot of materia also has these different clarifications. So when you're building out your units for TDH or TDW, you have to factor in which materia you're using, what their passives are asking them to do, and basically there's always going to be a natural guide with each unit of which way they want to be built. The game's going to tell you, if you read their passives, you read the requirements for their passives, it's going to tell you how to actually build these units. However, there are actually times where it's more effective to force one of the other builds. You could force someone to be TDH or TDW, or just use different weapons to deal more damage. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about like getting into a battle and dealing more damage. But for now, just focus on the basics. It's important to learn the basics of team building and master those before you move on to the more advanced stuff. There is one more important factor to consider when discussing true dual wield and true double hand units, and that is variance. So every weapon has variance. It's listed in its stats section, and if we look at the damage formulas again, we can see that variance is weighted the same as multipliers, so it's very impactful. One-handed weapons have low variance, while two-handed weapons have a high variance. This often means that a two-handed weapon will deal significantly higher damage than a one-handed weapon. However, you may need to run a fight over and over in order to high roll your damage. Variance is one of the reasons why you would want to go TDH on a unit. It might also be the reason why you equip an unorthodox weapon on a unit, because it has a higher variance. It's also important to note that a low attack weapon with a higher variance is actually more powerful than a higher attack weapon with a low variance. So you might see that online. People say, for example, if you look at Awakened Dragon Axar, which is a pretty old unit, his STMR is actually a single wielding katana, but he's best if he has something that is a dual wielding katana, and it's kind of misleading. And now we're starting to see weapons that can switch between single wield and dual wield, so you could use them for either purpose. But what's important to think about is that these true dual wield, double hand weapons are going to have a higher variance, and you can do more damage that way. Two-handed weapons also have an accuracy bonus, so you can use those when you have a boss or perhaps a opposing arena team that has high evasion. Next, let's take a look at some actual examples of builds. And before we do this, I just want to clarify that I am not an expert at this. It's something that I am still learning as well. So I'm going to go through my thought process, and there may be people out there with better builds. You can use FFBE-equip.com in the builder there to build your own units, and there's lots of ways to do it. So this is just an example of how everything works and where you can find it. So we're going to start with Angela here, and she's in her Brave Shift form, and I'll take a look at what I have equipped here and what I'm trying to do with her. So if we go to Brave Shift, you can see here is my equipment. Now with this equipment, I've got as high magic equipment as I can. However, I also have this Magister's Celestite Regalia of Will. And when we look at that, we have a bonus skill called the Magister's Tenant, and this gives a chain limit boost by 100%. So right there with this piece of gear, I have a 6 times chain cap, which is huge. Now with my vision card, I have her own vision card on, and you can see it's got 110 magic. That's a high magic stat that's going to give her lots of base magic. For equipping this, she gets 40% magic here, another 40% there, and then some LB damage boost, and that's only for Mana Series units. So this is a very nice boost for her to help it get to that cap that I'm going to get to. And if you're wondering, how do you know if you're going to hit cap or not? Do I have to count it up? No, there's going to be a way that we can check that out. But I also have some materia set here, and this materia is divided by several things. One of them is her TMR materia, which just gives some stats, and there's a reason why I have this equipped. Then we have the Black Mage Slacker, which gives some magic and LB damage boost. And then we have killer materia, so Dragon Vanquisher. In this case, it's only a 50% killer for physical and magic, but it also has a 30% magic stat boost. And then Universe Eater is going to give killers for Beast and for Fairy. Now, this is not built for a particular fight. It's just an example of how you might build her. You would want to use specific killers depending on what you're trying to do. So if you use this details screen up at the top right here, you click that, you will actually have this stat screen come up. And you can see what like the base stats of the limit breaker are there, etc., and where you're getting base stats from. But you can also click this big flashing right arrow, and boom, we've got our first important set of information. These are the caps that we were talking about. So the magic cap that's in red here, you can see it's at 445%. I am 45% over the cap for my magic boost, so I'm wasting 45%. I could take 45% of equipment boost off if I could, and funnel that somewhere else. And then on the right side, you can see the equipment stats, the TDH, and I'm at 350. So I could actually equip something that gives 50% TDH magic boost, and I would be able to cap that, and I would get more magic, I would become stronger. So this is one place to check. You want to check that you're as close to maxing the magic and the equipment stat magic, or if you're an attacker, you're using the the attack stat up there or the equipment attack stat up there. However, like I said, these are not the most important things. On the top left part of this screen, there is a little plus sign. If we click that, this is where we see some very, very important information. So this is where you see all of your killers. It's also where you see at the very bottom there, the LB damage boost. You'll also see things like jump damage boost, evoke damage boost. If you're actually equipping those things and using them, you'll see it here, but you can see that nice blue 300%. I have maxed out my LB damage boost. And let's say I was going after a dragon boss, you can see that I have maxed my physical dragon killer. And yes, Angela does have physical skills, so she would use this. However, she only has 250% for the magic dragon killer if she were to use one of her magic scaling, magic dealing abilities. So when you look at this screen, this is where you want to see things capped. You want to see the killers that you're specifically building for at 300%. You want to see the LB damage boost down at the bottom at 300%. If you have those two things set, and you also have your chain cap covered, then you are looking at this stats and equipment stats and trying to max those percentages here in order to boost your unit as much as possible. Now let's say you're brand new, you can't get this Clash of Wills, Magisters, Celestite, Regalia. Well, guess what? There's another option for you, Indestructible Light. So this is Save Your Soul's Lightning STMR. This is a chain limit boost 100%. So if you have a TDH unit, they will need to equip this in order to get their chain cap up to 6 times. And we can take a look at what that looks like when we look at Angela's passives. So here we are looking at Angela's skill set, and we can see some very important passives. So remember that I had her Trustmaster equipped, and it's because of this Gifted Mage skill here. This only activates when she has her TMR or STMR equipped, and it gives a 200% dragon killer buff. If you're using her against a dragon, this is very important to have active. It also gives her a 100% magic boost and a accuracy boost by 25% down below. So if you have a buff like this, you want to make sure that you are utilizing it. Now, if I was using her against a non-dragon opponent, then I might not use this depending on what other skills or what other stats I'm trying to max out. If we go down even lower, we can see other traits that she has that depend on certain things. So for example, here, this is just a magic boost that she gets. However, it says here, when equipped with one weapon, boost equipment magic by 100%. So this is making sure that you don't dual wield her because you want that nice juicy 100% magic. Now, there's actually a way to build Angela as a true double dual wield unit now. So like if you're thinking, oh, Mysidia, you're not thinking about that. I am thinking about that. We're talking about basics for new players. Another example here, see there's the chain mastery. It's that same symbol that we saw on the SOS Lightning's STMR. You can see she has a 100% boost. That's a passive she has. So we need to get that other 100% boost from our equipments. Other people, when you look at them, it will say 200% boost. That means that they have a max cap. You do not need to build their chain cap here. So we can see some other things. The heir to Altena, Kingdom of Magicians. When equipped with one weapon, give her another 100% magic, equipment magic. So you can see how units have these little passives here that tell you how they want you to build them. What type of equipment, what type of wielding situation are you going to have on. It all is secretly told to you through different passives on that unit's kit. All right, we're gonna go through one more example, and you can see I've got my Avalanche's Tifa here, and she is totally built out to do some damage, and she has a ton of sources of limit burst damage. If we look at her passives, you can actually see from the Wave the Fist here that she gets a bunch of attack boost. She gets 150% damage boost, and if you're using her with 2 weapons, she gets her 200% equipment attack boost. That's actually the cap for the whole thing right there. So it's really easy to build her TDW. So when we go and check out our stats, and let me check here. Okay, there we go. When we go and look at her stats here, we can see that this equipment stats is already in blue. We don't need to add any equipment stats for TDW. For her, she's already capped out. When we look at her LB damage, we can see it's at 350. We're actually 50% over, and that's just because of how easy it is to build for her. We have 150 from her passive, but we also have 50 from the Scarlet Glove. We have 50 from each of her TMRs, and we have 50 from her VC, which is the VC we want to use because it is going to give a 500 attack stat boost there, and it's also going to give us 125 base attack, so that's super high. So this is obviously an EX3 Tifa. She's easy to build this way. We have a ton of space now because when we take a look at our killers here, we can have a ton of space to build out killers however we want, and we don't have to worry about things like chain cap. She's already 2 times. Limit burst damage, it's already sorted without using a single materia. So we can build out 4 killer slots here, and then we could look at raising that attack 400% boost there. That's the last thing we're going to worry about. But I can go and sort by whatever killer I want. Maybe I want to go by human killer, and I can start building out my human killer. And then when we go and check that stat there, we can see my human killer is now at 225%. So, you know, is that as high as I can get it? I don't know, but like that's where the building comes in. Now my attack hasn't actually been solved that much, although I did get it up to 300%. Yes, it's not blue, it's not max, but that's okay. I've built up my killers first, and that's what's gonna help me deal more damage with this Tifa. So I thought I'd put some other important tips at the end of the video in case these help you out. The first one is base stats, and this is really important. This is something I had a lot of trouble finding direct information confirming how base stats work when I started the game. It's something that I learned over time. So when you see that a unit gets a 400% boost to attack, that 400, that's 4 times the amount of attack you have. It's not just based off of the attack that you see in the screen. If your unit has like 8,000 attack, it's not 4 times 8,000. It's actually based off of your base attack stat value. So if a unit has a very high base attack, then they're going to take more advantage of the 400% boost when you max out that boost in your unit screen. So base attack is affected by a bunch of things. The ones that I've most commonly seen is vision cards and stat pots. So you are able to raise your unit's stats like attack, magic, HP, etc. using stat pots. And you might think like, oh, I can boost my attack by 65. That's not very much at all. However, that's raising your base attack by 65. It means that when you get that 400% boost, it's actually going to be all the much higher because you added 65 to that calculation. Same thing with the vision cards. You might see a vision card that has 100 attack and one that has 90 attack, and you think, oh, you're only getting 10 more attack, but you're getting 10 base attack, and that will ultimately result in more attack once you max out your boost to the attack stat. So I think base stats are also affected by EX levels, but I haven't been able to confirm this anywhere, so if you know the answer to that, please let me know. Another topic that took me a while to learn about was hybrid units. So hybrid units use both attack and magic to scale their damage. It means that they attack against defense and spirit. This means you're also going to trigger physical and magical mitigation and covers, so there are some downsides to this. However, if a boss is weaker to physical damage, then it's better just to build a hybrid unit with more attack anyway, because it means that they have a weaker defense stat. Or if somebody is weak to magic damage, then you could build a hybrid damage dealer, primarily with the magic stat because they have a lower spirit stat. So it's kind of harder to build a hybrid unit. They're kind of tricky. Sometimes you just want to build both attack and magic, but they generally have higher potencies because they're more tricky to build. We should also talk about evokers because they are very, very useful, particularly for new players to clear old content, as evocation damage or evoke damage is fixed damage. It means that it will bypass evasion, counters, it bypasses mitigation, both physical and magic, it bypasses resistances, covers, mirage, all sorts of things. So it's a way to cheese fights. There's lots of different evokers in the game. Some of them are quite good. For a new player, you might use someone like Terra or Lunafreya still in Dark Visions to help you clear fights and try to get a really high damage amount. Now, a top tier player at this point is not using those units as much, but they are still very, very useful and totally worth building. However, evocation damage is kind of difficult to build, and a lot of new accounts are going to have trouble doing that. So it is a long-term investment to both build these units up and then get all of the materials and the equipment and the STMRs that they need in order to maximize their damage. One other note about evoke damage is that it doesn't rely on killers, so do not put them on your evokers. You might be looking at certain skills. For example, star player Titus has a skill called Spiral Cut Plus, and the skill says ignore defense. And you might be wondering about that. It has a lower modifier usually than other skills, so how does that actually work? Well, if you see the ignore defense modifier, it's actually more powerful than you might realize. Put simply, ignore defense 50% will double the modifier. So this comes in handy when you have a way of increasing a modifier. So for example, 50 times modifier with ignore defense 50% would actually become a 100 times modifier. Now, if you had an ability that could increase your modifier by 10 times, then a 50 times modifier would become 60 times. but a 50 times ignore defense modifier that you increased by 10 would then be multiplied by 2, and it would become 120 times modifier. So ignore defense skills are actually very, very powerful, even though the modifiers look weaker than other skills, especially if you have external boosts to ignore defense modifiers, because those are essentially doubled as well. It makes it for a very powerful skill, and that's actually Tidus's one of his best skills on his kit. So new players should be using him, should be using tickets on him to get him up as one of your beginning game finishers, and that's a skill that you're going to be using for him to chain and actually be able to beat a lot of bosses with his chaining. One final tip, and maybe one of the most important ones, is that I've taught you about so many different concepts in this video, and the optimize button in the character equipment screen factors in none of them. It's not a good button. It doesn't do any of these things that I've told you about, and it's not a reliable way to build formations for more difficult content. So if you are actually going to be building for a specific fight, a boss, whatever it is, you have to do it yourself, or look up a build, use FFBE whatever it is, so that you can plan out a formation and then actually equip the units yourself, use favorite equipment, etc., because the optimize button does not work. It's not useful unless you're just trying to get a really high attack stat for clearing some easy content. But otherwise, it's not something that you should use regularly. That's going to be it for this video. I am going to make a video in the future about actually choosing which units go into your party and what units you have to think about bringing whenever you're taking on difficult content. But for now, I'm just teaching you how to equip them before you get into battle. So I hope this was useful for you. If it was, let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video. Those things help me with the YouTube algorithm, and I really appreciate the support. Otherwise, I'm going to see you all in the next video.